Welcome to another episode of the Expat Focus podcast. I'm your host, Carly, an Australian living in France, and today we're talking about the way Brexit has altered the lives of EU citizens, including Brits who have chosen to live in other member states. Elena Remigi is one of them. As an Italian living in the UK, the years since the 2016 Brexit vote have been filled with uncertainty over whether she'll be able to stay or is even still welcome in the country she calls home. Elena founded a project called In Limbo. It started with a Facebook group that she created for people to share their Brexit experiences, and these personal accounts from EU citizens in the UK were compiled for a book. That book, called In Limbo, was quickly followed by a second, entitled In Limbo 2, which shares the stories of UK citizens living elsewhere in Europe. As the political stoush over a Brexit agreement continues and the 29th of March comes ever closer, In Limbo is a reminder for all of us of just how deeply this issue is affecting people's lives. You did start the In Limbo project and you edited the two books that came out of it. Can you explain to me how In Limbo, book number one, and then the follow-up book came about?
Well, the idea of this project stems both from my personal experience and from what happened after the referendum. I would say starting from, the referendum, in the month following it, many EU citizens who, like me, had no voice in it, had started sharing their feelings, their concerns, and feelings of anger, of worry, of even on betrayal on Facebook and other social medias. So I thought that our stories, our voices, if collected in a book, could finally be heard. So the idea was to create a book to reach the public and the politicians to raise awareness of our plight. But it's also the idea of the project stems from my own personal experience of dealing with the Home Office for my citizenship after having obtained permanent residency. The Home Office just simply would not believe that I was living in the UK, although I had a mortgage, a car, a family. So on top of all the tests and documents already requested, I had to send 3 kilos of additional evidence. And this for me was a Kafkaesque process where I felt I had to prove my existence here in the UK after 13 years of exercising my treaty rights as an EU citizen. But then I realized I was not alone in this, and hence the idea of the book, in particular the first one.
I have the two books in my hands, so for those not familiar with them, the first book produced is Brexit testimonies from EU citizens like yourself, Elena, in the UK, and then the follow-up book is Brexit testimonies from UK citizens in the EU, and both of them are not small books. They're a good 250 pages each, and looking through them, they are just filled with the most heartbreaking accounts because, as you said, you've been in the UK for a good 13 years and yet you're still in a situation where you needed to prove your residency rights to remain.
Yes, absolutely. And, I wasn't an isolated case. And actually, my story is certainly better compared to many other heartbreaking stories I've heard. In some cases, not all the stories have been collected in a book. We have 150 stories roughly per book. But I've also listened to countless heartbreaking stories behind the scenes. For many people, obtaining PR is simply not possible because of this CSI, this comprehensive in sickness insurance rule, which nobody had heard about, which was deemed illegal by the EU. And yet it prevents many people from, for getting their permanent residency and hence then applied for citizenship. For instance, the co-editor of the first book, Véronique Martin, a French person who's lived in the UK for over 30 years, married to a Brit, is not entitled to permanent residency. Although she has a PhD in English literature, she's lived here, and as I was saying, has a British husband. So, yes, the book contains many heartbreaking stories. The first book about EU citizens in the UK, but we mustn't forget that there is the other side, the people who live on the other side of the channel, our British friends who found themselves in the same painful limbo. And the second book came as a collaboration with a group called Brexit Hear Our Voice. But of course, the book contains many stories from several groups like Remain in Spain, Rift, British in Europe, and so on. When you look at the two books, in theory, they could be one, should be read as one, because the suffering is the same, although the problems are slightly different.
I think I saw a comment from yourself online somewhere where you mentioned there a real piece of history of illustrating the feelings of so many people at this time. And I think it's something that we're going to look back on and realize more than we do now, just how disruptive this period of Brexit has been.
Absolutely. I mean, our lives have been really plunged into limbo. I think this expression wasn't used widely at the time we produced the book. People were talking more about us being used as bargaining chips, as pawns by this government. But I really felt that the word limbo described really well how we felt, this situation of uncertainty, of our lives all of a sudden being plunged into this state of where you don't know how to act, you don't know what's going to happen, you can't plan anything for your future. The book contains all these stories, all these voices, because people have been hugely affected. Many of the people I speak to always talk about before and after the referendum as if they've had two lives, but truly we've had two lives. And the country we live in seems so different from what it looked like, it felt like before June 2016.
Certainly, I was in London at the time and I was able to vote as a Maltese citizen. And I voted Remain, and everyone I knew in London and the feeling in London was very much Remain. And in no way did I think that a Leave majority vote would be a reality. And it was a very big wake-up call. And what also jumped out at me when I was reading the stories in these books is some of the comments from the British colleagues of EU citizens, and they're recounting British colleagues saying things like, "Oh, it's not you that we want to kick out. It's just that we want less other people here."
Yes.
Like there was a naivety about what voting Leave would actually mean for so many people.
And also the fact I felt that what hurt most people is the fact that this was largely a vote against immigration, but it's never us. There is a lovely poem, a very poignant poem actually, in Limbo. It's called You and Me, and it describes the fact that people always say, well, it's not about you, and so who are they referring to? It's always the other immigrant, and you're the good ones, but they're always the others. So, as you were saying, you lived in London. London can be a little bit of a bubble. But when you look at the, whole of Britain, there are areas where the Leave vote was particularly strong and where EU citizens have really struggled and still struggle to live, particularly Polish communities, Eastern European communities, and xenophobia and racism have risen sharply after the referendum. 41%, is the rise of these crimes, and we have one of the contributors to the book, V, who's also an administrator in our group, who's was subjected to a racial attack, or besides xenophobic attack, because her son is mixed race. So what one can see in London is very different from what was happening in the rest of Britain. But it certainly was a surprise for many. Somehow I wasn't as surprised as many. I thought the vote would be around 50-50 on both sides, but I could see the rhetoric, I could see the language had changed. Nobody referred to me before as an EU migrant. I was considered an EU citizen. Probably I didn't even have a name, and I was just, me. But all of a sudden, the language on TV, on the media had changed and made me realize that the vote, could have gone the other way.
You mentioned PR or permanent residency issues before, and it goes for EU citizens in the UK and UK citizens in the EU that their residency rights after Brexit are in no way guaranteed. Even in the case of yourself, 13 years in the UK, people in these books that I'm reading have been in the UK for 30 years, and yet possibly cannot show enough evidence to the Home Office that they should remain. And that seems so insane to me. They have families, they've had careers. Do you think that those in government really understood the fallout for citizens of what was going to happen with a Brexit vote?
I don't think that, particularly amongst voters, that was understood. And I must say that we've had a number of people who, upon reading the book, have come back to us and said, I voted leave, but I never realized the impact this vote could have on EU citizens. Yes, probably there was a superficiality, but on the other side, we must not forget that we have the Home Office and the hostile environment introduced by Theresa May. This hostile environment, creates problems to a lot of people and leaves us in this, great uncertainty and worry. When you look at the scandal, the Windrush scandal, for instance, EU citizens wonder whether we'll be next. And they tell us now that a new settled status will be easy, everybody can apply, and people will get through it easily. But there are a lot of unanswered questions. And also, if it's introduced as secondary legislation, we know that things can always be changed and without even parliamentary approval. So we could find ourselves in a very difficult situation and not dissimilar from what the Windrush or other, people, non-EU citizens have found themselves in. So, as you were saying, I don't know whether that was deliberate, but certainly the first thing that was said after the referendum is that for us, things would have changed and that our rights weren't guaranteed. And this has left us in a situation of great uncertainty, of great worry. And for many people, particularly, not so much the people who have a job, but the disabled, the most vulnerable, say, categories, even older people who don't have the documents maybe to prove that they lived here 50 or 60 years, because truly things had changed, and after we joined the EU, we didn't need certain documents. These are the categories who are most at risk.
I read one account in your book from a British woman, or actually they didn't identify if they were a man or a woman, but a British person living in Spain who had moved to Spain for the better quality of life, to be able to not need to live counting every penny they had. And then the Brexit vote happened and the pound dropped, and suddenly they were counting their pennies in Spain, and they don't actually even have a way to financially return to the UK if they can't continue living in Spain. And that just must be such a horrifying situation to literally just be in so much, as you say, limbo while this is being sorted out.
Absolutely. I mean, the limbo, is very different from, depending on the person, because our lives are varied and there isn't a single, experience. But certainly for many pensioners, this is the situation they might find themselves in on, those pensioners who've moved maybe to Spain to find a better quality of life, or, other countries in the EU. But let's not forget that most British citizens who move to the EU are young, they work, they have children, and they are like us. They're waiting for an answer. They don't know what's going to happen to them. They don't know whether they'll have the right documents to stay, because of course each country will reciprocate what happens to us. So you can understand how they feel and how worried, like us, they are.
Are you hopeful that citizens' rights can be secured ahead of the March 29 exit date?
No, I'm not secure, but certainly what I would like to see is our rights to be ring-fenced, and they need to be ring-fenced now, both for EU citizens living in the UK and for UK citizens living in the EU. I think, we are tired. Enough is enough. And I think that it's time, to put our minds at rest and allow people to carry on with their lives. We certainly cannot carry on. And I certainly speak for, many people who've, sometimes have opened up and even recently and told me, 1 month, 2 months, but, now it's been 2 years, I can't carry on like this. So my hope is that on both sides of the channel, but particularly here, it is understood that it's so important that these rights are ring fenced, and for whatever the outcome of this agreement or something, we can't play with people's lives.
Since you collected these stories from those in the Facebook group, have the groups continued and how have you seen the discussions evolve?
At the start, I think most people were more hopeful that an agreement would be reached soon in terms of our rights, not of Brexit. As time goes on, what I notice is that people are more and more tired. They're angrier as well because, simply it's when this limbo feels like an eternity. It is very hard for some to be able to. I've seen people affected. That sometimes their mental health affected. Sometimes it's discouraging, but at the same time, we have to keep on fighting. We need to fight this fight because it is so important. It matters, for our lives, for our futures, and for the future of our children.
What are you hoping people get out of reading these books? And what are you hoping to put across in sharing these stories?
Well, my hope is to touch hearts and change minds. I think that this is really the main idea behind In Limbo and In Limbo 2. Really, it is important that people read these stories and realize that we're not numbers, we're not statistics, we're not a depersonalized mass of migrants. We are people with feelings, with lives, with children, and we are part, in the case of EU citizens here, we are part of Britain. We've contributed to this country. We contributed to make this country, great, as some people like to say, using the sentence in another context. And likewise, our friends, British friends in the EU, have done the same. They've integrated. In some cases they've married with a German, a French, and they've created new European families. So it's important that people really, by reading these stories, start realizing that there's more, and we can't be reduced to a mass of EU migrants.
Are you hopeful that your home of the UK will recover, I suppose, after Brexit? Are you hopeful for the future in what is your home at the moment?
Well, one never has to lose hope. And I always like to say that In Limbo and In Limbo 2 are, in particular, In Limbo is a letter of love to Britain. It's a country that we've chosen as our home. It's a country we've loved and, where we've put down our roots. It certainly won't be easy because a lot of lines have been crossed and a lot of work needs to be done. On the other side, when I read the accounts of many of my British friends, I noticed that Brexit really was dividing families, was creating, rifts between friends, communities. So there's a lot of work to be done in that direction. And this is why a book like this is a book which can be used as a political tool, and we've used it. We've used it to send it to more than 1,000 politicians on both sides of the channel. But on the other side is a book for the public, really to change their perception and learn to appreciate the other as a person and not as a number.
That's it for this episode. If you have a Brexit story to share, head over to expatfocus.com, follow the links to our forums or Facebook groups. You'll find a link to learn more about the In Limbo books in our show notes, and be sure to check out our other episodes. On Brexit and citizens' rights, we have a chat with Daniel Tetlow from the British in Germany organisation. But the podcast covers all aspects of expat life, from language learning to visas, having a baby abroad and relocating your pets, just to name a few. If you like what we do, please leave us a review, and I'll catch you next time.